Some truckers are literally buying DOT numbers online, and the federal government just issued a nationwide warning about it. FMCSA is telling carriers to not buy, sell, or lease USDOT numbers or MC numbers. And if they discover that it's happening, they can deactivate the number and revoke the authority that's tied to it. So in this video, I just want to break down exactly what's going on here, because there is so much confusion about DOT numbers, about MC numbers, and also operating authority in the trucking industry. So if you're a driver, owner, operator, or just someone thinking about starting up their own trucking company, this is something you should absolutely understand. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Cole, and today we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people in the trucking industry have heard about, but not a lot of truck drivers actually understand: buying, selling, or leasing DOT numbers or MC numbers. Because recently FMCSA issued a bulletin warning the trucking industry not to do this. And the reason they issued that bulletin is because apparently this is happening way more than people realize, and the numbers of times this has happened has been rising over the last couple years. So in this video, we're going to be talking about why FMCSA issued that warning, what drivers and carriers are actually doing, why selling a DOT number is illegal, the one situation where authority can transfer legally, and why regulators are cracking down on this heavily right now. So what did FMCSA actually say? Well, let's talk about the announcement itself. On March 13, 2026, the FMCSA issued a bulletin warning truckers not to buy, sell, or lease US DOT numbers and MC numbers. According to the agency, if they discover someone attempting to sell, purchase, or lease a DOT number, or purchase operating authority outside of a legitimate corporate transaction, they can and will take enforcement action. And that enforcement action can include deactivating the US DOT number and revoking the authority tied to it. So, in simple terms, that just means the company can lose the ability to operate. And obviously, that's a pretty serious consequence. Companies are here to operate, so if they can't operate, what's the point? Now, you might hear that and think, why would someone even try to buy a US DOT number in the first place? Like, buy off of someone? Well, the answer to that question actually ties to a much bigger issue in the trucking industry currently. Or maybe that bigger issue has been here since the beginning of trucking, you know? But I wasn't here. I wasn't alive, so I don't know. Before we get fully into this topic, though, I want to know something. If you've been trucking for a while, have you known someone that have ever tried to buy or sell DOT numbers and MC numbers? Maybe online, maybe through a dispatcher, maybe through social media? Let me know down in the comments, because believe it or not, things like that are becoming extremely common. So one of the biggest reasons the FMCSA is focusing on this now is because of Chameleon Carriers, and I'm sure you've heard that term within the last couple weeks to months. A Chameleon Carrier is basically a trucking company that changes its identity constantly. This happens when a company has serious problems, serious compliance problems, and a whole other list of things. For example, if they have bad safety scores, repeated violations, a ton of out-of-service orders, or a bunch of enforcement actions, instead of them fixing those issues, some companies will just shut down the business and just go get another DOT number, and the process continues. Sometimes they even open up or start a whole brand new company. Sometimes they even use someone else's DOT number. And other times they just try to buy or lease other operating authorities. And that's exactly the thing that regulators are really trying to prevent right now. Now, to understand why this is such a big deal, you have to actually understand what a US DOT number actually represents. A US DOT number is just not some random registration number. It's essentially an identification number for a carrier. It connects a company to safety records, inspections, violations, crashes, and compliance history. Pretty much everything that regulators track about a company is tied to that US DOT number. So when someone tries to sell or transfer that US DOT number to another person or another company, it completely undermines the safety tracking system, because now the identity of that initial carrier becomes totally unclear. And right now I'm explaining this in the best way possible, in the most simple terms possible. And those reasons are exactly why FMCSA is so strict about this. Think of it like a driver's license. Your driver's license belongs to you. It identifies who you are. You can't just sell it to someone else real quick, and you can't just rent it to someone else real quick, and someone else can't legally live and operate underneath your name and everything that belongs to you. A DOT number works in a very similar way. It belongs to the legal entity that it was issued to. But here's where things start to get really confusing for a ton of people out there, because sometimes you'll hear drivers say something like this: wait a minute, I thought trucking companies could sell their authority. And technically, there are situations where business transactions can involve operating authority, but it's not the same as someone selling selling their DOT number online somewhere. So when can authority actually and legally transfer? Well, let's talk about that. Now, there are legitimate situations where operating authority can remain in place after a business transaction. For example, if a trucking company is structured as a corporation or LLC, and someone buys that entire company, that is a legitimate business sale. In that case, the legal entity still exists. The company itself hasn't changed, only the ownership of that full company has changed. And in some situations, the DOT number and authority can remain tied to that corporation. But that is very different from someone just simply selling off a DOT number. Because in that situation, the original company still exists, and another carrier is trying to operate underneath that identity. You may be wondering now, well, why do some drivers or some companies try to buy authority? A lot of times it just comes down to speed. Starting a trucking company, like we all know, takes some time, serious time and effort. You have to apply for a DOT number, you have to apply for operating authority if required, you then gotta wait for the authority to become active, you gotta set up insurance, complete the registration process, and that whole process can literally take weeks. And some people out there, they try to shortcut that whole process. That's really where the shady deals start happening. You might see some advertisements out there that say things like this: authority for sale, rent my authority, use our DOT number, or operate underneath our MC number. Sometimes dispatchers or brokers will even try to connect carriers with those types of deals. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is, those arrangements are often never compliant with federal regulations. So what happens if FMCSA finds out that someone is doing this? Well, according to FMCSA's bulletin, if the agency discovers that someone is improperly transferring a DOT number or operating authority, they can immediately deactivate that DOT number. They can also completely revoke operating authority, and they can shut down the safety registration tied to that carrier, which just means the company is effectively made to not operate anymore. And that's pretty much why this bulletin was issued in the first place. To make it clear, very clear, that these types of transactions are not allowed. Well, Cole, I'm just a driver. Why should that even matter to me? Oh, what a great question. Let's talk about that. Even if you're just a driver, not the owner of a company, the situation can still affect you. Because if a carrier loses its authority, drivers can suddenly find themselves without work. So you might want to make sure that the company you work for are legit and they handle good business dealings, should I say. So just in general, understanding who you're working for and how that company operates is very important for your own livelihood, even if you're not the owner operator. Now, here's something I want to ask you. If you're watching this video right now and you are an owner operator, did you go through the full long process of getting your own authority, or did you start out leased onto another carrier? Because a lot of drivers actually start that way before getting everything in their own name fully later on. If someone out there wants to start their own trucking company, the safest way to do it is going to be, dare I say, the correct and legal way. Apply for your own DOT number, apply for your own operating authority, set up the proper insurance, complete the full registration process, and yes, it does take time. This is not going to happen overnight, but it avoids a lot of the problems that can come from trying to take shortcuts. To many people out there that are saying, well, why does FMCSA care about this all of a sudden? The thing is, they have always cared about things like this, but they've just been really increasing their focus on fraud in the trucking industry because it is like running rampant right now, especially when it comes to things like Chameleon Carriers and identity misuse. The goal is really just to make sure that the company that is operating the trucks is actually the company that is registered to that DOT number, because that's how regulators track safety. Look, at the end of the day, DOT numbers and operating authority are not just pieces of paperwork. They are part of a system that regulators use to track safety across the whole trucking industry. And when those numbers start being sold or transferred improperly, it threatens a whole system. That system just stops working, which is why FMCSA is warning carriers not to do it. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and please hit that like and subscribe button so that this video gets pushed out to even more truckers out there so that they can all stay in the know. On this channel, I break down trucking news, trucking regulations, some compliance stuff, and just things drivers should know before they run into problems out on the road. As always, stay safe, keep rolling.